In November 1978, more than 900 followers of a cult led by the American pastor Jim Jones committed suicide in Jonestown, Guyana, deep within the Amazon rainforest. They drank poison under the orders of the pastor. Shortly before, members of the cult had stabbed a group of journalists accompanying Senator Leo Ryan during his visit to the People's Temple. He had come to Guyana to investigate reports of abuse and violence at the site. The images of hundreds of bodies shocked the world. This is the full story behind one of the darkest chapters in modern history. Back in the 1970s, the United States was going through a period of intense social, political, and cultural transformation, marked by civil rights movements, government criticism, and a growing search for new forms of spirituality and community. It was in this environment of uncertainty and change that figures like Jim Jones emerged. A charismatic, articulate, and extremely persuasive man who mixed socialist discourse with a messianic vision of himself and his mission. He preached racial equality, support for the poor, and protection for the marginalized, which made him gain popularity among layers of society that felt excluded from traditional American society. Over time, his group, called the People's Temple, grew in number of followers, especially in San Francisco, where it became a powerful community. However, rumors began to circulate about strange practices within the People's Temple. Ex-members and family members reported cases of mental manipulation, brainwashing, emotional isolation, and even psychological violence suffered by the followers. Jim Jones exerted absolute control over his followers, demanding blind obedience and punishing anyone who doubted or questioned his orders, creating an atmosphere of constant fear. As scandals increased and investigations began, Jones started to believe he was being persecuted by the American government and needed to flee to a safe and distant place. That's when he chose Guyana, a former British colony located in South America, as the new home for his community, a refuge far from the corruption of the world. Guyana, a country whose official language was English at the time, seemed like a good choice. It had a tropical climate, available land, and a relatively open government towards foreign investors. After negotiations and political pressure, Jim Jones managed to get permission to establish an experimental farm called Jonestown, supposedly intended for sustainable agriculture and communal living. Jonestown would be the great social and spiritual experiment of the People's Temple, a model of perfect society according to Jones' vision. Thousands of dollars were invested in building the community, but behind the apparently altruistic idea, there were already clear signs of totalitarianism and absolute control by the leader. The first residents arrived full of hope, unaware that the place, surrounded by the Amazon jungle, would become the stage for one of the greatest tragedies in modern history. During the years leading up to the tragic end of Jonestown, rumors about the conditions inside the People's Temple community began to spread more and more, gaining strength through alarming reports from ex-members and concerned families. Many relatives of those who had moved to Guyana said they had lost contact with their loved ones, without receiving news or responses for months, sometimes even years. Some of these relatives reported that when they tried to visit Jonestown, they were prevented from doing so by members of the sect or received contradictory messages from their own relatives, suggesting they were under psychological pressure. With the increase in accusations, newspapers and television programs began to investigate what was really happening in that isolated community in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. One name began to appear frequently in articles and testimonies: Senator Leo Ryan, a politician known for his progressive stance and defense of human rights. Ryan was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives and represented the District of San Francisco, where many of Jonestown's residents had previously lived. Motivated by countless letters, phone calls, and emotional appeals from desperate families, he decided to organize an official trip to Guyana to personally investigate the allegations of abuse and human rights violations. The mission was carefully planned and included a team composed of journalists from major media outlets such as New West magazine and TV stations, as well as lawyers and family members of Jonestown residents. The initial goal was not to directly confront Jim Jones, but rather to hear from the residents and verify whether they were there voluntarily, without coercion or manipulation. Upon arriving in Guyana, the team had to go through the necessary bureaucratic process to enter Jonestown, as the country feared foreign interference and possible international embarrassment. After negotiations and guarantees that the visit would be controlled and supervised, Guyanese authorities allowed the delegation to enter the community for a few days. When the group arrived at Jonestown, they were greeted by members of the sect dressed in simple clothes, smiling and polite, but who seemed to follow strict orders on how to behave in front of the visitors. Despite the apparent friendliness, the senator and his team quickly realized that something strange was happening in the atmosphere of the place. The looks were fixed, the smiles forced, and the conversations seemed rehearsed. As they interacted with the residents, some people managed to discreetly pass notes or make gestures asking for help, revealing that they were trapped against their will. These early signals gave the senator and journalists the certainty that something serious was happening in Jonestown, and that their investigation would need to go far beyond what had been initially planned. On the morning of November 18, 1978, Senator Leo Ryan and his team were preparing to leave Jonestown after days of intense investigation, quiet conversations, and testimony collection. During his stay, Ryan had heard reports from residents who wanted to leave, saw clear signs of fear and forced obedience, and realized that many were under extreme psychological control. He then decided to authorize the departure of some followers who asked for help returning to the United States, including young adults and even some children of sect members. Meanwhile, Jim Jones, who had been monitoring every step of the delegation through informants within the community, became furious upon learning that people had decided to abandon Jonestown. For him, this was an unforgivable betrayal, a sign that his influence over the followers might be beginning to crumble. Jones entered a state of panic and called an urgent meeting with his main collaborators, ordering that something drastic be done to prevent the escape. Shortly before the group boarded a chartered small plane that would take them back to the U.S., a van left Jonestown heading to the airport located in the city of Port Kaituma, about 20 kilometers away. Inside the van were several armed men, all loyal to Jim Jones, trained to execute orders without questioning and programmed to see any attempt to escape as a threat to the integrity of the sect. When the senator's group arrived at the airport and was already close to boarding, the killers got out of the van and calmly walked toward the plane. Without warning and in front of the stunned eyes of other witnesses, they opened fire with automatic weapons, hitting Senator Leo Ryan, 2 journalists, a photographer, and a staff member of the delegation. The shooting lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough to leave 5 bodies lying on the ground of the airport apron, along with the severely injured. The members of the press who were filming the moment recorded the images of the attack, capturing scenes that would later be broadcast around the world and shock millions of people. After the massacre, the killers calmly returned to Jonestown, as if nothing had happened, while chaos set in among the few people who still did not know they were part of Jim Jones' final plan. This attack was the first major public event linked to the People's Temple that would put Jonestown in international headlines and seal the tragic fate of almost 1,000 lives. However, no one could imagine that the worst was yet to come. In the next few hours, the real horror would take over the community hidden in the jungle. That same afternoon of November 18, 1978, an emergency meeting was called by Jim Jones inside the central dining hall of Jonestown. All residents, men, women, and children, were forced to gather in that cramped space, where a heavy atmosphere of fear and tension had already begun to take hold of the environment. Jones, visibly shaken by the day's events, climbed onto the makeshift stage and began speaking in a grave and emotionally charged voice, transmitting a message of despair and fatalism. He said there was no hope left for the group, that the American government would retaliate, pursue, and punish every member of the People's Temple because of the attack on Senator Ryan. According to Jones, the authorities would arrive in Jonestown in the next few hours to arrest or kill each follower, and he offered only one way out: a collective act of resistance through suicide. He called it revolutionary suicide, saying it would be a final protest against an oppressive and unjust system, as well as a path to escape pain and persecution. While speaking, Jones displayed bottles of cyanide dissolved in grape-flavored drink mix, commonly known as Kool-Aid in the U.S., although it was actually another brand, and ordered people to form lines to drink it. Many present were bewildered, some wept quietly, others looked around for any escape, but few had the courage to question the leader's direct orders. Witnesses reported that some children asked adults what was happening, and many of them were taken to drink the mixture without fully understanding what it meant. Armed guards positioned strategically ensured that no one fled or attempted to stop the process, maintaining absolute control over the crowd. Recordings made during that meeting, later found and released, show the desperation of the people, with screams of panic, crying children, and even pleas for help, but everything was ignored by Jones. A young member of the sect begged, "Please, let me live," but was silenced by one of the local leaders, who repeated Jones' words about the inevitable end. As the first volunteers drank the deadly liquid and fell to the ground convulsing, terror spread among those still waiting their turn. Some tried to run, others hid, but they were quickly found and forced to follow orders under immediate physical threat. With the help of his main followers, Jim Jones personally supervised the process, ensuring that each person fulfilled their role in this final act of love and resistance. That same night, as hundreds of bodies lay scattered across the floor of the dining hall and outside areas of Jonestown, silence took over the community. There were no more screams, no playing children, no orders being given. Only the sound of winds passing between the trees of the Amazon jungle and the faint groans of some dying victims. The few survivors, about a dozen people who escaped or pretended to take the poison, remained hidden among the corpses, hoping death wouldn't reach them. Among them was a group of children who, having drunk less liquid or being more resistant to the poison, managed to survive for hours until they were found. Jim Jones, who had overseen the entire process, was found dead inside his cabin, slumped in a chair with a gunshot wound to the head. Apparently a suicide, though it was never confirmed whether he pulled the trigger himself. In the following days, search teams composed of Guyanese authorities, U.S. government representatives, and journalists entered Jonestown to investigate what had happened. The first images captured showed a desolate scene. Hundreds of bodies covered by sheets or simply lying side by side, many of them children with frozen expressions of fear and confusion. Photographs taken by reporters revealed the magnitude of the tragedy to the world, with images that would remain etched in collective memory as symbols of religious fanaticism and extreme mental manipulation. International media dedicated entire pages and special editions to covering the event, with headlines talking about the largest mass suicide in history and the death of nearly 1,000 innocent souls. Forensic medical experts began identifying the bodies, but the work was complicated due to extreme weather conditions, the advancement of decomposition, and the lack of official documentation for many of Jonestown's residents. Some bodies were sent to the United States for burial, but many had to be cremated on-site for sanitary and logistical reasons. Families across the country received the news of their loved ones' tragic fate with shock, grief, and, in some cases, anger. For years, they had tried to warn about the danger of the sect, but no one listened. The case sparked intense debates about the influence of charismatic leaders, the limits of religious freedom, and the responsibility of the state in monitoring groups potentially involved in illegal or dangerous activities. For American society, Jonestown left deep scars, forever changing the way the public viewed alternative religious movements and how easily normal people could be manipulated. But despite all the analysis and explanations, the most haunting question remained. How could nearly 1,000 people be convinced to die together, without resisting? Jim Jones was not just a preacher or religious leader. He was a master manipulator, an extremely intelligent and calculating man who knew exactly how to exploit people's fears, desires, and vulnerabilities. Born in 1931 in Indiana, he grew up in a poor family and was influenced from an early age by socialist ideas and alternative religious movements, which shaped his distorted worldview. From a young age, he showed fascination with power and leadership, creating small sects and spiritual groups even as a teenager, testing his persuasive and controlling skills. He combined progressive political discourse, speaking about racial equality, social justice, and protection for the poor, with elements of messianism, claiming to be a channel between God and humanity. In his sermons, Jones mixed real charity with emotional theater, using techniques such as fake healings, dramatic predictions, and even simulated miracles to impress and attract followers. He also deeply studied group dynamics, brainwashing techniques, and methods of psychological isolation, applying these practices within the People's Temple. For Jones, the most important thing was ensuring that his followers had complete dependence on him, emotionally, financially, and spiritually, causing them to lose any critical sense or autonomy. Inside the People's Temple, he demanded public confessions of sins, humiliated members who doubted him, and physically punished those who committed mistakes, keeping everyone under constant surveillance and fear. In addition, he promoted a culture of martyrdom, teaching that sacrificing one's own life for a greater cause was the ultimate act of courage and love, something he planted in his followers' minds for years. He also cultivated constant paranoia, repeatedly warning that the American government, the FBI, and other enemies were trying to destroy the community, which created a feeling of siege and urgency. This combination of emotional manipulation, absolute control, and intense indoctrination created an environment where questioning Jones was seen as betrayal, and leaving the sect was considered an unforgivable sin. Many of his followers were people weakened by life, homeless individuals, recovering addicts, racially discriminated minorities, who saw the People's Temple as a refuge, even if it was illusory. Over time, these people were programmed to see Jones as the only path to salvation, and when he ordered the final suicide, many simply obeyed, believing they were doing the right thing. Even today, behavioral psychologists, sociologists, and religious scholars study the Jonestown case as an extreme example of how the human mind can be reprogrammed through manipulation and isolation. But despite all the analysis and explanations, the most anguishing question remains. How could someone convince nearly 1,000 people to die for him without fighting? After the Jonestown Massacre, the entire world was forced to rethink the concept of religious freedom and how far it could go when applied without supervision or limits. The case became a turning point, not only because it was the largest mass suicide in modern history until then, but also because it exposed the dangers of fanaticism and mental manipulation. People began to associate the term cult directly with Jonestown, even though there are important differences between extremist groups and alternative religious communities. The media started using expressions like brainwashing, mental control, and mass suicide more frequently, helping to raise public awareness about the dangers of certain charismatic leaders. In the United States, the government strengthened laws related to the protection of minors and the investigation of organizations that isolated members from their families or controlled their financial lives. Despite this, it was difficult to establish a clear line between religious freedom and abuse of power. The images and reports from the massacre were also used as study material in universities and research centers specializing in social psychology, sociology, and religious sciences. Teachers and researchers analyzed the case as a classic example of blind obedience, mental conditioning, and group dynamics under totalitarian leadership. Many of these studies were based on recordings made inside Jonestown, including the final meetings, where it is possible to hear the tone of fear, pressure, and constant manipulation exerted by Jim Jones. In addition, families of the victims began to unite to demand justice, transparency, and psychological support for survivors and former members who managed to escape before the tragic end. Documentaries, books, films, and theatrical plays were produced in the following years, trying to understand and explain to the public what really happened in that community isolated in the middle of the Amazon jungle. Moreover, the phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid" entered popular American culture as a synonym for blindly following something, even if it is dangerous, a direct reference to the events of Jonestown. But despite all the debate and reflection the case generated, many questions remain unanswered. How could so many intelligent and well-intentioned people reach such a horrifying end? The legacy of Jonestown serves as a permanent warning about the dangers of emotional manipulation, the desperate search for belonging, and the lack of effective help mechanisms for those trapped in abusive environments. Decades later, the name Jonestown still echoes as one of the greatest mysteries of humanity and a shadow that must never be forgotten. When the first news of the mass suicide in Jonestown began to spread around the world, many countries were shocked by the scale and absurdity of the tragedy. Newspapers around the globe published front-page headlines with photos of bodies lined up on the ground in Jonestown, and television stations aired special reports showing the details of the case. In many places, the name Jonestown became synonymous with extreme fanaticism, mental manipulation, and blind obedience, serving as an example in psychology, sociology, and religious science classes. The United States, the home country of most of the victims, took a central role in responding to the disaster, sending medical teams, diplomats, and investigators to assist with identifications and repatriations. The U.S. government also faced criticism for not intervening earlier, as there were constant reports of abuse within the sect, but little effective action was taken. In Guyana, the local government, led by Forbes Burnham, faced international pressure to explain how it allowed a foreign group to establish an isolated community with so little oversight. Although it denied any direct responsibility, the country went through a wave of bad reputation, being seen by many as negligent or complicit in Jim Jones' actions. Religious leaders from different traditions, Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Buddhists, made public statements condemning the use of faith to manipulate people and warned about the danger of radical movements disguised as churches. Many theologians questioned how someone could use spirituality to lead hundreds of followers to death, highlighting the importance of educating the public about the differences between healthy religion and dangerous cults. In the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and other European countries, the case sparked debates about monitoring extremist groups and how to prevent vulnerable youth from being attracted to authoritarian doctrines. In Latin America, the event directly impacted how governments dealt with foreign religious communities, especially those established in remote areas without official supervision. Experts in national security and intelligence began including the study of cases like Jonestown in agent training as a way to prevent future acts of ideological terrorism or mass suicide motivated by fanaticism. Additionally, the case inspired artistic, musical, and cinematic productions that sought to understand or portray the story symbolically, as a way to collectively process the trauma. Songs, movies, plays, and even video games used elements of Jonestown to warn about the dangers of emotional manipulation and the loss of critical thinking. The global impact of the massacre was so great that, even decades later, Jonestown continues to be remembered as one of the darkest chapters in modern history, and a permanent warning about how much the human mind can be controlled. More than 40 years after the Jonestown massacre, the name Jonestown still echoes as one of the greatest mysteries of modern history. The tragedy was not just a religious or social issue. It deeply touched the human psyche, showing how far someone can go when subjected to constant emotional manipulation. Jim Jones was not a cartoonish villain. He was an intelligent, charismatic, and deeply disturbed man who knew how to exploit human weaknesses with terrifying precision. He used promises of salvation, equality, and protection to attract vulnerable people, but behind that facade, he hid an uncontrollable desire for absolute power. Jonestown teaches us that anyone, regardless of social class, education, or origin, can become a victim of brainwashing if placed in a controlled and isolated environment for long enough. The case also shows how easily social and governmental systems can fail when ignoring clear warning signs, especially when involving marginal or eccentric groups. Today, experts in security, behavioral psychology, and human rights study Jonestown as a way to prevent similar cases in the future, whether within sects, radical political movements, or digital manipulation networks. Modern technologies have brought new forms of mental control through social media, misinformation, and algorithms reinforcing extreme beliefs, and many see parallels between these phenomena and what happened in Guyana. Instead of charismatic leaders preaching in temples, we now have influencers, celebrities, and public figures shaping collective opinions with messages that are sometimes as persuasive as those of Jim Jones. Therefore, it is essential that each of us cultivates critical thinking, questions blind authorities, and maintains a vigilant eye on anyone trying to gain our total support and trust. The world has changed, but the mechanisms of manipulation remain, and understanding what happened in Jonestown is a powerful tool to recognize and combat these abuses before they repeat themselves. For those who lost their lives there, Jonestown is a painful reminder of how the search for hope can be turned into an instrument of death. For the survivors, it is a trauma that never fades, but also serves as a courageous testimony that the truth must always come to light. And for all of us watching this story decades later, Jonestown is a dark mirror forcing us to think. How far would we go for something we believe in? If you made it this far, it means you understood the importance of knowing what truly happened in Jonestown. Now, share this knowledge, leave your like, turn on the bell, and subscribe to the channel to follow more impactful stories like this one.